The thunderous blast of the freight train's horn shattered the peaceful Oregon twilight, echoing through the mist-shrouded Cascade Mountains. Through the gathering darkness, a massive black bear stood frozen on the gleaming rails, her body entangled in rusty barbed wire, her panicked eyes darting between her two tiny cubs and the approaching mechanical beast. As the ground began to tremble beneath her paws, she did something that would haunt witnesses forever. She stopped struggling, tenderly touched her nose to each cub's fur, and closed her eyes, preparing to meet whatever fate awaited them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. If this story of survival, justice, and the unbreakable bonds between mother and child moves you, subscribe to witness an extraordinary journey that reveals the true meaning of courage, compassion, and second chances. Chen lowered her binoculars, her hands trembling as she watched the horrific scene unfold through the twilight shadows. What should have been a routine evening patrol as a wildlife ranger in Oregon's Mount Hood National Forest had turned into a nightmare. The mother bears, desperate huffs, carried across the ravine, mixing with the distant thunder of the approaching train. "No, no, no," Emma whispered, her breath visible in the chilly spring air. She grabbed her radio, knowing even as she did that help would never arrive in time. "This is Ranger Chen. We have a wildlife emergency near Crossing 23. Bears on the track. Repeat, bears on the..." She trailed off, realizing the futility of the call. Whatever was going to happen would be over in minutes. Through her binoculars, she could see the cruel intricacy of the trap. Someone had used barbed wire, not chains, wrapping it deliberately around the mother bear's massive body in a way that made escape impossible. The more she struggled, the deeper the barbs dug into her flesh. Small droplets of blood darkened her. Thick black fur where the metal points had pierced her skin. The cubs, barely 2 months old, huddled against their mother's legs, too young to understand the danger, but old enough to sense their mother's terror. Their frightened whimpers carried on the wind, slicing through Emma's heart like a knife. 20 years as a wildlife ranger had taught her to maintain professional distance, to avoid anthropomorphizing the animals she protected. But there was something in the mother bear's eyes that stripped away all that training, something that reminded her painfully of another mother's sacrifice. Emma's mind flashed to her own mother, Catherine, who had died protecting her during a hiking accident 15 years ago. The memory of her mother pushing her out of the path of a falling boulder, choosing in that split second to save her daughter instead of herself, surged through Emma's consciousness. The same look of desperate love she'd seen in her mother's eyes that day, now reflected in the bear's dark gaze. The train's headlight suddenly burst around the curved track, its beam cutting through the misty twilight like a laser. Emma was already moving, half running, half sliding down the steep embankment, her boots struggling for purchase on the rain-slicked ground. Her training screamed at her to stop. Approaching a trapped bear, especially a mother with cubs, violated every safety protocol she'd ever learned. But something stronger than training drove her forward, a deep understanding of what it meant to be willing to die for your children. She could feel the vibration of the approaching train through the soles of her boots as she reached the tracks. The mother bear's head whipped toward her, nostrils flaring. Emma expected aggression, but instead saw something that made her pause. A glimmer of intelligence, of desperate pleading that transcended species. The bear wasn't just afraid. She was asking for help. Emma pulled out her multi-tool, her fingers, clumsy with cold and adrenaline as she approached the trapped animal. The barbed wire was industrial grade, thick and unyielding. Someone had wrapped it methodically, creating a deadly snare that would have required time and planning to set up. This was no accident. This was deliberate cruelty. "Easy, Mama," Emma murmured, trying to project calm she didn't feel as the train's horn blasted again. "Closer now. Let me help you." The bear watched her, massive body trembling but holding still as Emma began sawing at the wire. Blood welled around the barbs, staining Emma's hands as she worked. The cubs whimpered, pressing closer to their mother's legs. They were beautiful little things, their black fur still soft and fuzzy, their eyes bright with intelligence and fear. Emma could see they were healthy and well-fed, which meant their mother had been doing everything right until someone decided to turn her maternal devotion into a death trap. The train's headlight illuminated the scene now, turning everything, stark and shadowless. Emma could hear the screech of emergency brakes being applied, but she knew it wouldn't be enough. These mountain trains, loaded with timber and ore, took miles to stop. They had seconds, not minutes. The first strand of wire snapped with a twang. The bear flinched but didn't move, seeming to understand that movement would only make things worse. Emma's hands were bleeding now too, cut by the sharp barbs, but she barely felt it. All that mattered was the next wire, and the next, time dissolving into a desperate race between her sawing tool and the approaching train. She was vaguely aware of shouting from the train, of a conductor leaning from his window, probably thinking she was insane. Maybe she was. But as she worked, she felt a strange sense of peace, of rightness. This was why she'd become a ranger, in the first place, not just to protect the wilderness, but to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. The final strand of wire parted just as the train's heat washed over them. Emma didn't think. She acted on pure instinct. She scooped up one cub, tucking it against her chest as the mother bear grabbed the other in her mouth. Together, they launched themselves off the tracks, rolling down the steep embankment as the train thundered past with inches to spare. They landed in a tangled heap at the bottom, Emma's body curled protectively around the cub she held. For a moment, she lay there, heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst, ears ringing from the train's passage. Then she felt movement, the cub squirming in her arms, very much alive and unhurt. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She carefully set the cub down, expecting the mother bear to charge her now that the immediate danger had passed. But the bear didn't attack. Instead, she gently set down her own cub and checked both babies with tender nose touches, making soft huffing sounds of reassurance. Only when she was satisfied they were unhurt did she turn her attention to Emma. Time seemed to stop as human and bear regarded each other in the gathering darkness. Blood matted the bear's fur where the barbed wire had torn her flesh, but she stood steady and strong. In her dark eyes, Emma saw something that transcended the usual barriers between human and wild animal, a recognition, an understanding. Then the bear did something extraordinary. She stepped forward, slowly and deliberately, and gently touched her nose to Emma's hand, the same hand that was bleeding from the barbed wire cuts. It was the briefest of contacts, lasting less than a second, but in that moment, Emma felt a connection she would never be able to fully explain to anyone else. It was acknowledgement, gratitude, a bridge between two mothers spanning the vast divide between their species. The spell was broken by voices from above. Railroad workers who had stopped the train and were making their way down to investigate. The mother bear gathered her cubs with soft grunts, shepherding them toward the safety of the forest. At the tree line she paused, looking back one final time, then melted into the shadows with her family. Emma stayed where she was, letting the rain wash the blood from her hands as she tried to process what had just happened. She knew this wasn't over. The barbed wire trap was evidence of something darker, something that would need to be investigated. Someone in these mountains was targeting wildlife, and they weren't acting alone. Her radio crackled to life. "Ranger Chen, come in. We got your emergency call. What's your status?" Emma looked at her bloody hands, at the scattered pieces of barbed wire glinting in the last light of day, at the dark forest where 3 bears had disappeared to safety. She thought of her mother, of sacrifice and survival, of the thin line between humanity and savagery, and of the even thinner line between humans and the wild creatures they shared this world with. "I'm here," she responded, her voice steady, despite everything that had happened, "and we have work to do." Above her, the train workers were collecting pieces of the barbed wire as evidence. One of them, an older man with graying hair, called down to her, "Ma'am, you okay? That was either the bravest or craziest thing I've ever seen." Emma stood, wincing at her bruised muscles. "Sometimes they're the same thing," she said, then added more quietly, "Sometimes they're the only thing worth doing." She began climbing, back up to the tracks, her ranger's training already kicking in. She needed to document everything, photograph the scene, collect evidence. But even as she focused on procedure, her mind was racing ahead. Someone had taken the time to set this trap, to deliberately target a mother bear and her cubs. This wasn't random cruelty. This was organized, purposeful. And if she was right, this was just the beginning of a much bigger story. The train workers helped her up the embankment, their faces a mix of awe and concern as they took in her bloody hands and torn uniform. As Emma began photographing the scene, her thoughts kept returning to that moment of connection with the mother bear, to the look in those wild eyes that had reflected something so fundamentally similar to what she'd seen in her own mother's gaze 15 years ago. She touched the old compass that hung around her neck, her mother's last gift to her, given just days before the accident. "I'll find them, Mum," she whispered. "Whoever did this, I'll find them." The twilight deepened into true night, but Emma kept working, illuminating the scene with powerful flashlights. This was more than just another case now. This was personal. Somewhere in these mountains, someone was targeting the creatures she had sworn to protect. They had tried to use a mother's love as a weapon, turning maternal devotion into a death trap. They hadn't counted on running into another mother's daughter, one who understood the true meaning of sacrifice and protection. As Emma carefully bagged pieces of the barbed wire as evidence, she made a silent promise to the mother bear and her cubs, to her own mother's memory, and to all the vulnerable creatures of these mountains. This was just the beginning, and she wouldn't stop until justice was served. The night wind carried the distant sound of the mother bear calling to her cubs, strong and free in their forest home. Emma smiled, knowing that at least for tonight, love and courage had won out over cruelty. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, that was enough. The next morning dawned cold and grey over Mount Hood National Forest, a fine mist clinging to the towering Douglas firs like a ghostly shroud. Emma Chen sat at her desk in the ranger station, surrounded by evidence photos from the previous night's rescue. Her bandaged hands throbbed as she typed her report, each keystroke a reminder of the desperate struggle on those rain-slicked tracks. The images on her computer screen told a story that made her blood boil. Close-ups of the barbed wire showed tool marks, professional grade cuts made with industrial equipment. This wasn't the work of amateur poachers. The placement of the trap, right before a blind curve in the tracks, had been carefully calculated. Whoever had done this had intimate knowledge of both the train schedules and bear behavior. A knock on her office door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in!" she called, minimizing the photos as Marcus Thompson, her fellow ranger and mentor of 15 years, entered. His weathered face was creased with concern. "How are the hands?" he asked, setting a cup of coffee on her desk. "I'll live," Emma replied, flexing her fingers. "But Marcus, this wasn't random. Look at these markings." She pulled up an image showing the distinctive pattern of cuts in the wire. "This is specialized equipment, probably the same kind used in logging operations." Marcus leaned closer, his expression darkening. "Timber company grade," he agreed, "and there's something else you should see." He pulled out his tablet, bringing up a map of the region. "In the past month, we've had 3 other suspicious incidents. A collapsed near Thompson Creek, tampered bear traps in the north sector, and now this. All within a 5-mile radius of the new logging concession," Emma finished, the pieces clicking into place. Summit Timber Corporation had won the contract 6 months ago, despite fierce opposition from environmental groups and local tribes. The company had promised sustainable practices and wildlife protection measures, but "There's more," Marcus said quietly. "Remember Sarah Two Rivers, the tribal wildlife officer who went missing last winter?" Emma's head snapped up. Sarah had been her friend, a passionate defender of the forest's bears. The official report said she'd gotten lost in a snowstorm, but her body had never been found. What about her? "She was investigating Summit Timber, said she had evidence of illegal wildlife trafficking. The day before she disappeared, she sent me this." He handed Emma a thumb drive. "I've been trying to decode her notes, but maybe you'll see something I missed." Emma plugged in the drive, her heart racing as files populated her screen. Sarah's meticulous notes revealed a pattern: locations, dates, photographs of suspicious equipment. But it was the last entry that made Emma's breath catch. A grainy photo showed cages being loaded onto trucks in the dead of night, and a familiar face supervising the operation. Victor Kane, Summit Timber's regional director. "The bears aren't being killed," Emma whispered, horror dawning. "They're being captured. The trap last night wasn't meant to kill that mother bear. It was meant to incapacitate her so they could take her cubs." Marcus nodded grimly. "There's a black market for bear cubs in Asia. They're sold to private collectors, traditional medicine practitioners. A single cub can fetch hundreds of thousands of dollars." Emma thought of those 2 tiny cubs from last night, how they'd huddled against their mother, trusting and vulnerable, the idea of them being torn away, shipped across the ocean in dark cages. Her hands clenched, reopening the cuts from the barbed wire. "We need proof," she said, standing. "Hard evidence that will stand up in court." "Emma," Marcus cautioned, "these people are dangerous. Sarah." He couldn't finish the sentence. "I know," Emma said softly. "But Mom always said courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing what's right anyway. She touched the compass at her neck. Sarah was my friend. Those bears are my responsibility. I can't walk away. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. All right, but we do this smart. I've got a contact in the FBI's Environmental Crimes Division. Let me make some calls. As Marcus left, Emma turned back to Sarah's files. A pattern emerged. The trafficking operation seemed to center around an old fire lookout tower deep in Summit's logging concession. Perfect cover for illegal activities, with clear views of any approaching vehicles. Her radio crackled. "Ranger Chen, come in." It was Diego Ramirez, one of their wildlife technicians. "We've got tracks near Thompson Creek. Big female black. Bear, 2 cubs, heading north. Looks like she's injured." Emma's heart jumped. The mother bear from last night. "On my way," she responded, grabbing her gear. She needed to make sure that family was safe, and maybe, just maybe, following them would lead her to what Sarah had been trying to expose. The drive to Thompson Creek took her through stands of ancient forest, trees that had stood witness to centuries of human intrusion into their domain. Emma thought about Sarah, about her mother, about all the people who had given their lives protecting these wild places. The easy thing would be to look the other way, to file her report, and let someone else handle it. But that wasn't who she was, wasn't who her mother had raised her to be. She parked at the trailhead and began following Diego's coordinates. The morning mist had lifted, revealing a landscape still wet from recent rain. Perfect tracking conditions. The bear prints were clear in the mud, mother and cubs moving with purpose toward higher ground. Emma moved quietly, her years of experience allowing her to navigate the rough terrain almost silently. After about a mile, she found spots of blood in the tracks. The mother bear's wounds were still bleeding, but the steady pace of the prints suggested she was strong enough to keep moving. A sound caught her attention, the distant whoomp-whoomp of helicopter rotors. Emma ducked under a low-hanging branch, scanning the sky. There, a black helicopter emerging from behind a ridge, flying low and fast. No markings, no identification numbers. As she watched, it banked sharply and disappeared behind the next ridge, heading toward the old fire tower. Her radio crackled. Again. "Emma!" Marcus's voice was urgent. "Get back to the station, now. FBI agents here. You need to hear this." Emma looked at the bear tracks leading deeper into the forest, then at the ridge where the helicopter had vanished. Every instinct told her to keep following the bears, but Marcus's tone brooked no argument. Something big was happening. "Copy that," she replied, heading back. As she hiked back to her vehicle, Emma's mind raced. The helicopter, the bear tracks, Sarah's files. Pieces of a puzzle that was starting to form a disturbing picture. Someone was running a sophisticated wildlife trafficking operation right under their noses, using a legitimate logging operation as cover. The mother bear and her cubs had escaped last night, but how many others hadn't been so lucky? How many cubs had been torn from their mothers, shipped off to lives of captivity? And what had Sarah discovered that had cost her her life? Back at her truck, Emma made a quick decision. She pulled out her phone and took photos of the helicopter's flight path, marking the coordinates. Then she sent everything, the photos, Sarah's files, her own notes, to a secure cloud drive. If something happened to her, at least there would be a trail to follow. The compass around her neck seemed to grow heavier. Her mother had always told her that true north wasn't just a direction, it was a moral compass, pointing the way toward what was right. Right now, every instinct, every piece of evidence, every memory of Sarah's passionate dedication was pointing her toward a confrontation she might not be ready for. But ready or not, she had to follow where the evidence led. She owed it to Sarah, to her mother's memory, to those bears, and to herself. As she started her truck, Emma made a silent promise to the forest around her. This time, the traffickers wouldn't win. This time, someone would stand between them and their innocent targets. And maybe, just maybe, she would finally discover what had really happened to Sarah Two Rivers on that snowy night when she'd ventured too close to the truth. FBI Special Agent Diana Rivera stood in Emma's office, her dark suit a stark contrast to the casual ranger attire around her. She held up a photograph that made Emma's heart stop. Sarah Two Rivers, smiling beside a rescued bear cub, taken just days before her disappearance. "Miss Chen," Agent Rivera said, her voice carefully neutral. "We believe Sarah Two Rivers wasn't just investigating wildlife trafficking. She'd uncovered something much bigger. Summit Timber isn't just shipping bear cubs. They're using their logging operations as cover for international money laundering." Emma exchanged glances with Marcus. Money laundering? Private collectors in Asia pay hundreds of thousands for bear cubs, Rivera explained. Perfect way to move dirty money. But Sarah found evidence suggesting Summit's operation goes deeper. They're connected to a network of illegal wildlife trades across 3 continents. She spread more photos across Emma's desk. Luxury cars at remote logging sites, private planes landing on unmarked airstrips, security teams with military-grade weapons. This isn't just about bears anymore. It's organized crime hiding behind corporate legitimacy. Emma's hands throbbed beneath their bandages as she picked up a photo showing Victor Kane meeting with known wildlife traffickers. "What do you need from us?" "We need evidence linking Summit directly to the trafficking. Documents, photographs, witnesses. We've been building a case for months, but we can't move without concrete proof." Rivera paused, studying Emma intently. "Sarah trusted you. She mentioned you in her last reports." A wave of emotion hit Emma, grief for her lost friend, guilt for not seeing the danger sooner. "The helicopter," she said suddenly. "I saw an unmarked black helicopter heading toward the old fire tower this morning, and I have coordinates for fresh bear tracks. The mother and cubs from last night are heading that way." Rivera nodded sharply. "Summit maintains a research facility near that tower. Our intel suggests that's where they hold the animals before transport, but we can't get close. They have too many eyes on the ground." "But I can," Emma said. "An idea forming. I'm a ranger. I have legitimate reason to be anywhere in this forest." She pulled up a map on her computer. "Look, there's a known denning site near the tower. I could request access for a routine survey." "Absolutely not," Marcus interjected. "Emma, these people killed Sarah." "Actually," Rivera said slowly, "this could work. Summit can't refuse access to Forest Service personnel without raising suspicions. We could wire you for sound, have backup. Nearby." "No." The voice came from the doorway. Emma turned to see Thomas Redwing, Sarah's father, and a tribal elder standing there. His weathered face was etched with grief and determination. Not alone. He entered the office, moving, with the quiet dignity that Emma had always admired. "Our tribe has treaty rights to conduct traditional ceremonies in these forests. No one can deny us access." He looked at Emma, his dark eyes intense. "2 sets of eyes are better than 1. Emma felt a surge of hope. Thomas was right. Combining her authority as a ranger with the tribe's legal rights would make it almost impossible for Summit to keep them out without arousing suspicion. "It's risky," Rivera warned, "if they suspect anything." "Everything worth doing carries risk," Thomas said quietly. "My daughter understood that. She died trying to protect the bears, the forest, our way of life." He touched the ceremonial pouch at his belt. "We have our own ways of gathering evidence." Emma thought of the mother bear's eyes last night, of that moment of connection and trust. She thought of Sarah's passion, her dedication to protecting these creatures, and she thought of her own mother, who had taught her that courage meant facing your fears, not ignoring them. "When do we start?" she asked. The next hour was a flurry of preparation. Rivera gave them recording devices disguised as ordinary items, a pen for Emma, a traditional medallion for Thomas. They memorized emergency extraction protocols and recognition signals for the undercover FBI teams that would be positioned nearby. As they geared up, Thomas pulled Emma aside. "Sarah spoke of you often," he said softly. "She said you understood the spirit of the bears, that you saw them as more than just animals to be managed." Emma touched her mother's compass. "They're family," she said simply. "All of them, the bears, the trees, the mountains, they're all connected. Mom taught me that. Sarah believed it too." Thomas nodded, something softening in his expression. "In our stories, bears are teachers. They show us how to be brave, how to protect what matters. Today, we honor their medicine by standing against those who would harm them." Marcus approached, with final equipment checks. His face was worried, but proud. "Emma, be careful. These people, they're not just poachers. They're organized criminals with corporate protection." Emma hugged him. This man who had been like a father to her. "Since her mother's death, I learned from the best," she said. "Trust me." As they prepared to leave, Rivera handed Emma one last piece of equipment, a satellite phone. "If you find Sarah—" She didn't finish the sentence. Emma met her eyes. "We'll find the truth, whatever it is." The drive to the summit timber checkpoint was tense with anticipation. Emma and Thomas had their story ready, a joint Forest Service and tribal survey of traditional sites and bear denning areas. Everything was properly documented, permissions officially granted. The guard at the gate was suspicious, but couldn't deny them access without cause. As they drove through, Emma caught sight of fresh tire tracks leading toward the fire tower. Heavy vehicles had passed recently. They parked at a designated survey point and began their survey, methodically working their way toward the tower. Thomas sang traditional songs, his voice carrying through the trees, providing perfect cover for their true purpose. Emma's trained eye caught signs that most would miss: broken branches at bear height, unusual wear patterns on game trails, signs of heavy equipment where none should be. And something else: fear. The forest felt wrong, empty of the usual sounds and movements. The animals knew something was amiss. They were halfway to the tower when they heard it, a soft whimper carried on the wind. Emma and Thomas exchanged glances. That sound would be unmistakable to anyone who worked with bears, a frightened cub calling for its mother. Thomas touched his ceremonial pouch, which concealed a high-resolution camera. "The spirits guide us," he whispered. Emma nodded, her heart pounding, but her mind clear. They had found what they were looking for. Now came the dangerous part: gathering enough evidence to bring down an international crime ring while surviving to tell the tale. The mother bear's dark eyes flashed in her memory, that moment of trust and connection filling her with purpose. Somewhere in these mountains, other bears needed help. Sarah had died trying to save them. Emma touched her compass, feeling her own mother's strength flow through her. It was time to finish what Sarah had started. Emma and Thomas moved silently through the forest, following the sound of frightened cubs. The old fire tower loomed ahead, its metal frame rust-streaked and imposing against the cloudy sky, but it was the new structure beside it that caught their attention. A low concrete building surrounded by high fences topped with razor wire. "Security cameras," Emma whispered, pointing to nearly invisible devices mounted in the trees. Thomas nodded, pulling out a small leather pouch. He began sprinkling a mixture of herbs and tobacco on the ground, his lips moving in silent prayer. "Old ways hide new methods," he murmured, and Emma understood. His traditional ceremony would explain away their careful examination of the perimeter to any watching eyes. As they moved, Emma's modified pen captured high-resolution images, while Thomas's medallion recorded audio. A truck rumbled down the access road, and they ducked behind a massive Douglas fir. Through her binoculars, Emma watched men in summit. Timber uniforms unload large crates. The whimpers grew louder, and her heart clenched as she spotted movement inside the crates, dark shapes pressing against air holes. "4 cubs," Thomas whispered, his voice tight with anger. "Young ones taken from their mothers." Emma's hand went to her compass, remembering last night's rescue. How many other mother bears had fought desperately to protect their babies, only to lose them to these monsters? She thought of Sarah, who had died trying to expose this operation, and felt a fierce determination rise within her. A familiar figure emerged from the building. Victor Kane, Summit's regional director. Even at this distance, his expensive suit and arrogant bearing were unmistakable. He was speaking into a satellite phone, gesturing at the crates. "Shipment leaves tonight," Thomas translated, his hearing sharper than Emma's. "Private airstrip." Suddenly a commotion erupted from inside the building. Shouts of alarm were followed by a deep, furious roar that Emma recognized instantly, an enraged mother bear. The sound brought her back to her own mother's final moments, that desperate cry of protection before pushing Emma from the path of the falling boulder. Kane barked orders, and armed men rushed into the building. Emma's earpiece crackled with Agent Rivera's voice. "Do not engage. I repeat, do not engage. Backup is 20 minutes out." But Emma was already moving. Another roar shook the air, followed by gunshots. Thomas grabbed her arm. "Emma, wait!" She turned to him, seeing her own pain reflected in his eyes. "I couldn't save my mother," she said softly. "I couldn't save Sarah. But I can save them." Thomas held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. He pulled 2 small bundles from his pouch. "Smoke medicine," he explained, pressing them into her hand. "When the time comes, break them. The spirits will guide you." Emma squeezed his hand, understanding passing between them. Thomas would maintain their cover, documenting everything, while she would do what rangers were meant to do, protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Using the chaos as cover, Emma circled behind the building. A service door stood propped open, emergency generators humming nearby. She slipped inside, finding herself in a corridor lined with steel doors. The roaring was louder here, mixed with the frightened cries of cubs. Following the sounds, Emma discovered a horrifying scene. The facility was a sophisticated wildlife trafficking hub, with climate-controlled cells designed to house captive bears. Most were empty now, but evidence of recent occupation was everywhere. Claw marks on walls, tufts of fur, the lingering scent of fear. The mother bear's fury led Emma to a larger chamber. Through an observation window, she saw the source of the chaos. A massive female grizzly, recently captured, had somehow broken free of her restraints. She was protecting a small cage containing her cubs, keeping the armed guards at bay through sheer maternal rage. Emma recognized her with a jolt. It was another mother bear they'd been tracking, one who disappeared from her usual territory a week ago. The guards were trying to circle behind her with tranquilizer guns, but the bear's desperate defense of her cubs made them hesitate. Time seemed to slow as Emma assessed the situation. The bear was powerful, but injured, tranquilizer darts bristling from her shoulders. She wouldn't last much longer, her cubs huddled in their cage crying for her. Soon she would fall, and her babies would join the others in those waiting crates. Emma thought of her mother's last words. "Live brave, baby. Live true." She touched her compass, took a deep breath, and broke Thomas's smoke bundles. Sweet-smelling smoke billowed through the ventilation system. The guards shouted in confusion as their eyes began to water. Emma pulled her ranger's jacket over her nose and moved. Years of working with wildlife had taught her to be swift and decisive. She grabbed a fallen tranquilizer rifle, expertly adjusting its dosage. 2 quick shots dropped the nearest guards before they could react. The mother bear whirled toward her, but something passed between them. That same recognition she'd felt last night. A desperate mother recognizing an ally. Emma ran to the cub's cage, fingers flying over the lock. Come on," she muttered. The bear kept the other guards at bay, her massive body a wall of protective fury. The lock finally clicked open. "Get your cubs," Emma said softly to the bear. "I'll hold them off." As if understanding, the grizzly gently gathered her crying cubs, nudging them toward a service exit. Emma provided covering fire with the tranquilizer gun, forcing the guards to take cover. More smoke filled the air, carrying Thomas's prayers of protection. Through her earpiece, she heard Agent Rivera coordinating the FBI response. They were minutes away, but minutes might be too long. Kane's voice boomed through a speaker. "Kill them all! We can't risk witnesses!" The guards switched to real ammunition. Bullets pinged off metal walls as Emma ducked behind equipment. The mother bear and her cubs were almost to the exit. Just a little longer. A searing pain in her shoulder told Emma she'd been hit. She stumbled, but kept moving, providing covering fire as the bear family escaped into the forest. Through the smoke and chaos, she caught a glimpse of Thomas at the tree line, camera steady, documenting everything. The sound of helicopters filled the air, FBI backup arriving at last. Emma's vision blurred as blood soaked her ranger's jacket. But her hand was steady on the rifle as she faced the approaching guards. Her mother's compass seemed to pulse against her chest, reminding her of every brave thing she'd learned from the women in her life. Her mother's sacrifice, Sarah's dedication, and the fierce protective love of mother bears. "Live brave," she whispered. "Live true." The building erupted into organized chaos as FBI tactical teams breached every entrance. Emma heard Agent Rivera shouting commands, saw Kane being tackled as he tried to flee. Through it all, She kept her position, guarding the exit where the mother bear had escaped with her cubs. Thomas appeared beside her, supporting her wounded body with gentle strength. "The evidence is secure," he said softly, "and the bears are safe. You did it, Emma. You finished what Sarah started." Emma looked up at the old fire tower, now swarming with federal agents. Years of organized crime hidden in plain sight, exposed at last. She thought of the mother bear and her cubs, running, free in the forest, and felt a deep peace despite her pain. "No," she corrected gently, "we did it, all of us. The bears, the forest, the spirits, we're all connected. Sarah knew that. Mom knew that. Sometimes it takes a mother's love to teach us what really matters." As paramedics rushed to treat her wound, Emma heard a distant sound, carried on the wind, the deep, contented chuff of a mother bear calling to her cubs, safe in their forest home. She smiled, touching her mother's compass one last time. Some battles were worth any price, and love, in all its forms, was the strongest force in any forest. The truth had finally come to light, and with it, justice for Sarah, protection for the bears, and healing for the deep wounds that greed had inflicted on this sacred land. Emma knew there would be more battles ahead, more creatures needing protection, more truth to defend. But for now, she had kept her promise to her mother, to Sarah, to the bears, and to herself. And in the end, that was all any brave heart could hope to do. 3 weeks after the raid on Summit Timber's trafficking operation, Emma stood at the edge of a remote clearing, her arms still in a sling, but her spirit stronger than ever. The morning sun filtered through the canopy, painting dappled shadows. On the forest floor, beside her, Thomas Redwing prepared a sacred bundle of herbs, his weathered hands moving with practiced grace. "They found Sarah," he said quietly, breaking the contemplative silence, "in a ravine near the old fire tower. She died protecting their secrets, but in death she helped us expose their crimes." Emma's heart ached for her friend, but there was peace in finally knowing the truth. The FBI's investigation had revealed the full scope of Summit's operation. Dozens of bears trafficked, millions in laundered money, and a network of corruption that stretched from local officials to international crime syndicates. "The bears led us to her," Thomas continued, lighting the sacred herbs, "just like they led you to the truth. In our traditions, bears are more than just animals. They're messengers, teachers of courage and protection." Emma touched her mother's compass, remembering the fierce eyes of the mother bears who had fought so desperately for their cubs. "They taught me something about family too," she said softly. "About how love doesn't always look the way we expect it to." A rustle in the undergrowth drew their attention. Through her binoculars, Emma spotted a familiar shape, the first mother bear she'd saved, the one from the train tracks. Her wounds had healed, leaving only faint scars in her dark fur. Her cubs played nearby, stronger and more confident now. "Look," Thomas whispered, pointing to something remarkable. The mother bear wasn't alone. The grizzly from the trafficking facility was there too, her own cubs wrestling with their black bear cousins. 2 different species, traditionally territorial, sharing space and protection in the aftermath of their shared trauma. "They're helping each other heal," Emma realized. The bears had formed their own unconventional family, finding strength in unity, just as she, Thomas, and the others had done. Her radio crackled with Marcus's voice. "Emma, you there? The release is ready." "Copy that," she responded, unable to keep the emotion from her voice. We're in position. Today marked a new chapter in their fight to protect the forest's wildlife. The FBI had recovered 6 bear cubs from Summit's international buyers, and after weeks of rehabilitation, they were finally ready to return home. Wildlife officials arrived with the transport crates, moving with careful precision. These cubs had already endured too much trauma. Their release needed to be perfect. Emma supervised the placement, ensuring everything was ready. "The mothers know," Thomas said, watching the adult bear's behavior. "They understand what we're doing." He was right. Both mother bears had positioned themselves at the edge of the clearing, their own cubs safely stashed in a nearby thicket. They watched the humans with alert but calm eyes, as if comprehending that this moment was about healing, not harm. Agent Rivera arrived, her usual formal suit replaced by practical field gear. The investigation had changed her too, helping her see beyond the legal implications to the deeper significance of their work. Kane and his associates took plea deals. She informed them. They're giving up their entire network, trading routes, corrupt officials, everything. This case is going to dismantle trafficking operations across 3 continents. Emma nodded, but her focus remained on the bears. Human justice was important, but out here in the wild, other kinds of balance needed restoration. The first crate was opened. A small female cub, her fur still showing stress marks from her captivity, poked her head out cautiously. She was one of the cubs they'd documented during the raid, torn from her mother weeks ago. What happened next left even the seasoned wildlife officials in awe. The grisly mother rose to her full height and made a soft calling sound. Not her own cub's signal, but something different, a universal mother's welcome. The released cub hesitated, then scrambled toward her. One by one, the rescued cubs emerged. Some were black bears, others grizzlies, all victims of human greed, and one by one, the 2 mother bears called them in, accepting them into their unusual, blended family. "Extraordinary," Rivera breathed. "I've never seen anything like this." "Love knows no bounds," Thomas said simply. "These mothers understand loss, and they choose to heal it, not just for themselves, but for all who need protection." Emma thought of her own mother, of Sarah, of all the fierce protective spirits who had guided her to this moment. The compass round her neck seemed to warm, as if acknowledging the deeper truth unfolding before them. The last cub, a tiny black bear no more than 3 months old, stumbled getting out of his crate. Without hesitation, both mother bears moved to help, each gently nudging him toward safety. Their own cubs emerged from hiding to welcome the newcomers, all traces of species rivalry forgotten in the simple joy of play. "This is what we were fighting for," Emma said, watching the bears form their new family bonds. Not just to stop the criminals, but to protect this, their ability to heal, to love, to teach us what really matters. Thomas nodded, adding more herbs to his smoking bundle. Sarah understood that. She gave her life not just to expose crimes, but to protect something sacred, the spirit of motherhood itself, the force that holds all life together. As if confirming his words, the mother bears began leading their expanded family toward the deeper forest. The cubs, both rescued and wild-born, frolicked together, their earlier traumas already fading in the joy of freedom and belonging. Marcus approached, holding a package wrapped in ceremonial cloth. "The tribal council wanted you to have this, Emma. Inside was a beautiful beaded medallion bearing the image of a mother bear with cubs. "You've earned the right to wear the bear medicine," Thomas explained. "You've shown the same courage, the same protective spirit." Emma's eyes filled with tears as she accepted the honor. She thought of that desperate night on the train tracks, how one act of courage had sparked a chain of events leading to this moment of healing. Her mother's compass and the tribal medallion now hung together over her heart, reminding her that love and protection spoke all languages, crossed all boundaries. The bears disappeared into the forest, but their lesson remained. In their ability to overcome trauma, to forge family from tragedy, to choose love over fear, they had shown a path forward not just for themselves, but for all who witnessed their journey. "The work isn't over," Rivera reminded them, ever practical. "There are more trafficking operations out there, more animals needing protection." "No," Emma agreed, touching both her mother's compass and her new medallion. "But now we know the truth, that the strongest force in nature isn't violence or greed. It's love in all its forms, and as long as there are mother bears teaching their cubs to be brave and people willing to stand up for what's right, there's hope." Thomas began a soft prayer song, his voice carrying through the trees. The forest itself seemed to join in, wind and leaves and distant bear calls weaving together in a melody of renewal. Emma closed her eyes, feeling connected to everything: the bears, the trees, the spirit of her mother, the memory of Sarah, the ancient wisdom Thomas shared. She was no longer just a ranger doing her job. She was part of something larger, a circle of protection and courage that stretched beyond human boundaries. The mother bears had shown her that family could be found in unexpected places, that healing could come from the most unlikely alliances. And in that knowledge, she found her true path forward, not just as a protector of the wilderness, but as a keeper of its deeper truths, a student of its endless capacity for love and renewal. The compass pointed true north, but her heart now knew an even truer direction, toward healing, toward hope, toward the endless possibility of love creating family in all its wild and wonderful forms. 6 months after the raid on Summit Timbers trafficking operation, Emma stood before a packed auditorium at the National Wildlife Conservation Conference in Seattle. Her ranger uniform was adorned with both her mother's compass and the tribal bear medallion, symbols of the dual heritage that had guided her journey. "We often think of conservation in terms of numbers," she began, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "Statistics, populations, recovery rates. But today, I want to tell you about something different, about how a mother bear's love changed not just our forest, but our entire understanding of healing and family." The screen behind her showed images of the remarkable bear family that had formed in the aftermath of the trafficking bust. The 2 mother bears, one black, one grizzly, had not only maintained their unusual alliance, but had inspired a shift in scientific understanding of ursine behavior. "These bears defied everything we thought we knew," Emma continued, advancing to a slide showing the blended family teaching their cubs to fish. "Traditional rivals became sisters in survival. Cubs from different species learned from both mothers. They created something unprecedented, a conscious choice to expand the definition of family." Dr. Helena Martinez, the world's leading expert on bear behavior, leaned forward in her front row seat. She had spent the last 3 months studying what scientists were now calling the Mount Hood phenomenon. But this story isn't just about bears, Emma said, touching her compass. It's about the connections that save us all. When Sarah Two Rivers gave her life to expose wildlife trafficking, when Thomas Redwing shared his people's ancient wisdom, when FBI agent Rivera looked beyond laws to see the heart of what we were protecting, we too were learning to expand our circle of family. The next slides showed the transformation of the former Summit timberland. After the company's assets were seized, the Tribal Council and Forest Service had partnered to create the Sarah Two Rivers Wildlife Sanctuary. The old fire tower, once a hub of criminal activity, now served as an educational center where Thomas taught traditional ecological knowledge alongside modern conservation practices. 3 weeks ago, Emma shared, her voice softening with emotion, we witnessed something extraordinary. A new mother bear, born to our blended family, had her first cubs. Instead of hiding them away, she brought them to the sanctuary's boundary, as if showing them to us. More remarkably, both original mother bears, now grandmothers, were with her. The audience murmured as footage played, showing the 3 generations of bears. The new mother had inherited the unique social behavior of her adoptive family, proving that this wasn't just an aberration, but a learned adaptation that could be passed down. This isn't just a feel-good story, Emma emphasized. This is evolution in action. These bears, faced with trauma and loss, didn't just survive, they innovated. They showed us that the greatest force in nature isn't competition, but cooperation. Love isn't just an emotion. It's a survival strategy. Dr. Martinez stood up during the question period. What you've documented here is revolutionary, she declared. But beyond the scientific implications, what do you think is the most important lesson for conservation? Emma thought of that desperate night on the train tracks, of the mother bear choosing to comfort her cubs, even in what she thought were her final moments. She thought of her own mother's sacrifice, of Sarah's courage, of Thomas's wisdom. That we're all connected, she answered. The bears taught us that healing isn't individual, it's communal. When we saved them, they saved us right back. They showed us that family isn't about species or blood. It's about choosing to protect each other, about turning trauma into transformation. After the conference, Emma walked along Seattle's waterfront with Dr. Martinez and Agent Rivera, who had become an unlikely but dedicated ally in wildlife protection. The trafficking networks are adapting, Rivera warned. They're getting more sophisticated, harder to track. So will we, Emma replied with quiet confidence. She pulled out her tablet, showing them the sanctuary's latest initiative. Local tech companies, moved by the bear's story, had funded a state-of-the-art monitoring system. But unlike traditional approaches, this one was designed with input from tribal elders, combining traditional knowledge with modern technology. See these patterns? She pointed to thermal imaging showing bear movements. Thomas taught us to read them. The bears aren't just surviving, they're creating new social networks, teaching each other, protecting not just their own cubs, but their entire extended family. Dr. Martinez shook her head in amazement. It's like they're building their own sanctuary, their own society. And this new mother bear bringing her cubs to show you, that suggests a level of trust we never thought possible. Trust goes both ways, Emma said softly. She shared a recent photo taken by the sanctuary's cameras. The new mother bear was teaching her cubs to forage, But in the background, clearly visible, was a small memorial marker for Sarah. The bears had made it part of their territory, often resting nearby as if standing guard. "They remember," Thomas had said when he first noticed this behavior. "They honor those who protected them." Back at the sanctuary a week later, Emma patrolled the boundaries where the trafficking facility had once stood. Nature was already reclaiming the space. Wildflowers grew where cages had been. Cubs played in the shadows of the old fire tower, now covered in educational murals painted by local youth. Her radio crackled with an excited call from one of the junior rangers. They'd spotted the grandmother bears, teaching the newest cubs how to fish, taking turns, watching over the little ones. It was behavior that would have seemed impossible a year ago, but now felt like a gift, a reminder that healing could take unexpected forms. Emma touched her compass and medallion, feeling the weight of both her inheritances, her mother's courage and the tribe's wisdom. The bears had shown them a new way forward, one that braided together protection and innovation, traditional knowledge and modern science, individual strength and communal healing. As she watched the multi-generational bear family move through their forest home, Emma remembered something Thomas had told her. The bears aren't just surviving. They're showing us how to live better, how to be better. They're teaching us that the future belongs to those who dare to reimagine family, who choose love over fear, again and again. A young cub spotted her and stood on its hind legs, more curious than afraid. Its mother watched calmly, trusting in the relationship their unusual family had built with the sanctuary's protectors. Emma smiled, touching her radio to record her daily observations. Adding to the growing body of knowledge these remarkable bears were helping to create. This wasn't just a story of survival anymore. It was a story of evolution, not just of species, but of hearts and minds. The bears had shown them that even in the face of humanity's worst impulses, nature's capacity for adaptation, for love, for healing, was boundless. And in that lesson lay hope, not just for wildlife conservation, but for all who sought to protect what was precious, to heal what was broken, to expand the circle of family until it encompassed all who shared this wild and wonderful world. 1 year after the Summit Timber Raid, a December snowstorm blanketed the Sarah Two Rivers Wildlife Sanctuary in pristine white. Emma followed fresh bear tracks through the dawn silence, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The compass and medallion at her neck clinked softly with each step, a reminder of the journey that had brought her here. The tracks told an extraordinary story, not just of one bear family, but of many. What had started with 2 mother bears choosing to raise their cubs together had sparked a revolution in ursine behavior. More bears had joined the extended family, creating what scientists now called a cooperative den system, something never before documented in North American bears. Like a village, Thomas had said when they first noticed the pattern, they're building their own society. Emma paused at the crest of a ridge, using her binoculars to scan the valley below. The sanctuary had expanded thanks to corporate restitution funds from Summit Timber's seized assets. But more remarkable than the physical growth was the transformation of the relationship between humans and bears. Through her lenses, she spotted movement near the old fire tower, now a thriving education center. A mother bear, one of the original survivors, was showing her latest cubs how to dig for winter roots. Nearby, 2 younger females worked together to catch fish, demonstrating the cooperative hunting behaviors that had amazed wildlife biologists worldwide. "Emma?" Marcus's voice crackled over her radio. "You need to see this. North Ridge, near Sarah's memorial." She changed direction, following her mentor's coordinates. As she approached, she heard it, a sound that still gave her chills. The deep, melodic humming that the bears had developed, a communication method unique to this population. Dr. Martinez had recorded it, proving that these bears had created their own dialect, a language born from their chosen family bonds. The scene at the memorial took her breath away. The two original mother bears, now revered grandmothers of the clan, sat peacefully near Sarah's marker. Between them played cubs from 3 different mothers, their fur varying from black to brown, their behavior showing none of the species rivalry that should have existed. But it was what surrounded them that made Emma's eyes fill with tears. A ring of fresh pine boughs and winter berries had been carefully arranged around the memorial stone. At first glance, it might have looked like random forest debris, but Emma had spent enough time observing these bears to know better. "They're leaving offerings," Thomas said softly, appearing beside her like a spirit, "just as we do for our ancestors." The bears had been observed collecting specific plants and arranging them at significant locations. Behavior that challenged everything known about ursine intelligence. They weren't just surviving, they were creating culture. Emma's phone buzzed with a message from Agent Rivera. The FBI's Wildlife Trafficking Task Force, inspired by the sanctuary's success, had expanded across the Pacific Northwest. More importantly, they'd adopted a new approach, incorporating indigenous knowledge and local community involvement in their protection strategies. "The bears aren't the only ones evolving," Rivera had written. "We're learning to think differently about what family means, what protection looks like." A young bear cub noticed their presence and stood upright, curious rather than afraid. Its mother, one of the original rescued cubs, now grown, watched calmly. Trust had replaced fear. Understanding had grown where terror once ruled. "Remember, when we thought we were just saving bears?" Emma asked Thomas, keeping her voice low to avoid disturbing the scene. He nodded, adding sacred herbs to his ever-present smoking bundle. "Instead, they saved us. They showed us what's possible when we choose love over fear, cooperation over conflict." The sanctuary had become more than a refuge. It was a living laboratory of hope. Scientists came from around the world to study not just the bears, unusual social behavior, but the successful integration of traditional ecological knowledge with modern conservation practices. Local schools brought children to learn from the bears and tribal elders. Young people who might have once seen only wilderness to be exploited now witnessed the power of protection, the strength of chosen family. Emma thought of her mother, of Sarah, of all those whose sacrifice had made this possible. The compass seemed to warm against her chest, while the bear medallion hummed with the energy of something ancient and new being born. A snow flurry danced through the clearing, dusting the memorial and the bears with diamond light. The cubs played on, supervised by their extensive family network. One of the grandmother bears rose, moving with the dignity of age, and approached the memorial. With deliberate care, she added a freshly harvested winter root to the ring of offerings. "They're teaching us," Thomas whispered, "that healing isn't just about recovering from wounds. It's about building something new from what was broken." Emma nodded, understanding deep in her bones. The bears had taken tragedy, the trauma of trafficking, the separation of families, the violence of greed, and transformed it into triumph. They'd proven that adaptation wasn't just about survival, but about choosing a better way forward. Her radio crackled again. Marcus, coordinating with sanctuary staff, Dr. Martinez's team documenting new behaviors, local tribal youth learning traditional tracking methods. The symphony of protection and study, ancient wisdom and new discovery, all centered around these remarkable bears who had chosen to rewrite the rules of what was possible. The grandmother bear returned to her family group, accepting nuzzles from cubs not her own, but cherished all the same. The bear's humming grew stronger, their unique song carrying through the snow-hushed forest like a prayer. Emma touched her compass and medallion, feeling the connection to all that had come before and all that was yet to be. The bears had shown them that love wasn't just an emotion. It was an evolution, a choice that could reshape the very nature of family, of society, of healing itself. As the snow continued to fall, Emma recorded her observations, adding to the growing documentation of this remarkable phenomenon. But beyond the scientific significance, beyond the conservation success, there was something more profound at work here. These bears, who had every reason to fear humans, to retreat into isolation, had instead chosen to build bridges. They'd created their own answer to trauma, their own definition of family, their own way of honoring those who had protected them. In doing so, they'd taught humanity a lesson that went far beyond wildlife conservation. They'd shown that the greatest act of courage wasn't in fighting against what hurt us, but in daring to create something new from the ashes of pain. The cubs played on, supervised by their vast network of mothers, aunts, and grandmothers. The memorial stood sentinel, its offerings of pine and berries and roots, a testament to memory transformed into meaning. And in the falling snow, human and bear alike shared a moment of profound understanding, that sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty was not revenge, but the radical act of choosing love again and again and again. Emma smiled, feeling her mother's strength in the compass, the tribe's wisdom in the medallion, and the bear's lesson in her heart. They were all connected, all part of a greater story of healing and hope. And in that connection lay the truth that would guide generations to come, that family was not about blood or species or tradition, but about the courage to love beyond boundaries, to protect beyond limits, to create something beautiful from the raw materials of loss and hope. The winter wind carried the bear's song through the forest, a melody of triumph and transformation, a reminder that even in the coldest seasons, new life could bloom, new families could form, and new ways of being could emerge from the depths. Of love and courage combined, spring arrived at the Sierra Two Rivers Wildlife Sanctuary with an unexpected challenge. Emma stood at the edge of a newly formed landslide, her heart heavy as she surveyed the damage. The winter's heavy rains had triggered a massive earth movement, cutting off access to one of the bear's primary denning areas. "The cubs will be emerging soon," Marcus said, studying topographical maps on his tablet. "They'll need clear paths to their traditional feeding grounds." But the landslide had done more than block access. It had exposed something disturbing. Among the torn earth and uprooted trees, metal glinted in the morning sun. Old cages, rusted chains, remnants of Summit Timber's trafficking operation that had been hastily buried years ago. They had more holding sites than we knew about, Emma realized, her hand going to her mother's compass. The sight of those cruel devices brought back memories of that night on the train tracks, of desperate mothers fighting to protect their cubs. Thomas appeared beside them, his face grave as he examined the debris. "The earth remembers," he said, softly. "Sometimes it chooses when to reveal its secrets." A familiar humming sound drew their attention. Through the trees, they spotted several of the sanctuary's bears approaching, including the two grandmother bears who had started the remarkable social revolution in their population. The bears moved with purpose, investigating the landslide with almost human deliberation. What happened next left even the seasoned sanctuary staff in awe. The bears began to work together, using their strength and intelligence to clear a new path. They rolled rocks aside, pulled fallen trees to create bridges, and showed their cubs safe routes around the obstacle. "They're not just adapting," Dr. Martinez whispered, filming the unprecedented behavior. "They're problem-solving as a community." The bears' solution was ingenious. Rather than trying to recreate their old route, they were establishing a new one that actually improved access to their feeding grounds. More remarkably, they were teaching this new knowledge to their entire extended family group. Emma watched as one of the grandmother bears, the same one she'd freed from the train tracks, demonstrated to younger mothers how to test unstable ground for safety. The bears' unique communication calls echoed through the forest. Their self-developed language conveying complex information about dangers and solutions. "We need to document this," Dr. Martinez said excitedly. "This level of cooperative problem-solving, this transmission of knowledge, it's revolutionary." But Emma saw something beyond the scientific significance. In the bears' response to this crisis, she recognized a deeper truth about healing and resilience. They hadn't let the exposed remnants of their trauma trigger fear or retreat. Instead, they'd faced the challenge head-on, working together to forge a new path forward. As the days passed, the bears' solution proved more effective than any human intervention could have been. They'd created a network of alternative routes, using their intimate knowledge of the landscape to establish safer, more efficient paths. More importantly, they'd turned the crisis into an opportunity for teaching and strengthening their community bonds. The exposed trafficking equipment became part of the sanctuary's educational program, but not in the way anyone expected. The bears themselves seemed to use it as a teaching tool, bringing cubs to see the rusted cages while demonstrating their freedom, their strength, their unity. "They're not letting their past define them," Thomas observed. "They're using it to show their young ones how far they've come." Emma thought of her own journey, of how her mother's sacrifice had led her to this path of protection and healing. The compass at her neck had guided her through darkness to find purpose in pain. The bears were teaching the same lesson, that tragedy could be transformed into triumph through the power of community and love. One morning, something extraordinary happened at the landslide site. The bears began bringing items to cover the exposed trafficking equipment, branches, leaves, even flowers. It wasn't random debris, it was deliberate, almost ceremonial. "They're burying their past," Thomas said softly, adding sacred herbs to his smoking bundle. "Not to forget, but to grow beyond it." The sanctuary's success had already challenged scientific understanding of bear behavior, but this was different. This was evidence of emotional intelligence, of cultural memory, of the capacity to process and move beyond trauma in ways previously thought impossible in non-human species. Word of the bears' response to the landslide spread through the conservation community. Researchers and wildlife managers came from around the world to witness what was being called the Mount Hood miracle. Bears, who had not just survived trafficking, but had created a new model of resilience and cooperation. Emma stood with Agent Rivera, watching the bears work together to strengthen their new paths. "We've got similar landslides threatening habitats up and down the coast," Rivera said, "but now we have a new paradigm for response. Let the animals show us the way." The FBI's Wildlife Trafficking Task Force had evolved, incorporating lessons learned from the sanctuary's bears. They'd discovered that the most effective protection came not from force, but from fostering community resilience, both in human and animal populations. A young bear cub, born to one of the rescued mothers, approached the buried trafficking equipment. Instead of showing fear, it began to play nearby, completely at ease. Its mother watched calmly, demonstrating a level of trust that would have seemed impossible in the dark days of the Summit timber operation. "That's the real victory," Thomas said, pointing to the playing cub. "Not just survival, but the freedom to thrive, to play, to trust again." Emma touched her compass and medallion, feeling the connection between past and present, between loss and renewal. The bears had shown them that healing wasn't just about overcoming trauma. It was about using that experience to build something stronger, something that could help others find their way forward. As spring deepened, new life flourished along the bears' created paths. Wildflowers bloomed where cages had been exposed, and cubs played where chains had once brought only pain. The bears continued to maintain and improve their network of roots, their cooperative behavior becoming more sophisticated with each passing day. "They're not just adapting to change," Dr. Martinez observed. "They're actively shaping their environment, creating a better future for their entire community." Emma thought of her mother's last words about living brave and true. The bears had embraced that wisdom in their own way, showing that true courage wasn't in denying the past, but in using it as a foundation for growth and transformation. The landslide that had threatened to disrupt the sanctuary had instead revealed something profound, that healing wasn't a destination, but a journey, one best traveled together. The bears had transformed a potential disaster into an opportunity for teaching, for strengthening bonds, for proving that love and cooperation were stronger than any obstacle. As the sun set over the sanctuary, the bears' unique song echoed through the forest, a melody of triumph and possibility. They had taken the exposed remnants of their painful past and buried them beneath new growth, new paths, new ways of being family. In doing so, they taught humanity a precious lesson, that sometimes the greatest acts of healing come not from erasing what hurt us, but from transforming it into stepping stones toward a better future. Emma watched a mother bear teaching her cubs to navigate the new paths, their movements confident and free. The compass pointed true north, but her heart followed an even truer direction toward the endless possibility of love, creating strength from adversity, hope from hardship, and family from the very forces that once threatened to destroy it. Summer blazed across the Sarah Two Rivers Wildlife Sanctuary, bringing an unprecedented challenge. A devastating wildfire approached from the west, threatening not just the sanctuary, but the delicate social structure the bears had built. Emma stood at the command center, her mother's compass and tribal medallion gleaming in the orange glow of the approaching flames. "The fire's moving faster than predicted," Marcus reported, pointing to satellite imagery. "We've got less than 48 hours before it reaches the sanctuary's core." But it wasn't the fire itself that worried Emma most. It was its impact on the bears' remarkable community. The blaze threatened to destroy the careful balance they'd created, the cooperative den systems, the shared feeding grounds, the cultural sites they'd established. Dr. Martinez rushed in, clutching her tablet. "Emma, you need to see this." The live feed from their monitoring stations showed something extraordinary. The bears weren't fleeing randomly from the fire, they were organizing. The grandmother bears, those original survivors of the trafficking operation, were leading a coordinated evacuation. "They're using the communication system they developed," Thomas observed, watching the footage. "Listen to the variations in their calls." The bears' unique humming had taken on new patterns. Through their surveillance network, they could see the older bears guiding younger mothers with cubs, showing them safe routes, sharing knowledge of distant denning sites that could serve as temporary shelter. "But that's not all," Dr. Martinez continued, switching camera feeds. "Look at what they're doing at the memorial." The scene brought tears to Emma's eyes. Bears were carefully collecting the offerings they'd left at Sarah's memorial over the years, moving them to safer ground. It wasn't just instinct driving them, it was cultural memory, a determination to preserve what mattered most to their community. "They're not just running from danger," Emma realized. "They're protecting their heritage." Agent Rivera arrived with federal fire teams, her usual business suit replaced by firefighting gear. "We've got resources incoming, but this fire's different. The drought conditions, the wind patterns, it's creating its own weather system." Emma studied the maps, her ranger training combining with everything she'd learned from the bears. "About adaptation and cooperation. We need to think differently," she said, "not just about fighting the fire, but about protecting what these bears have built." An idea formed, inspired by the bears' own problem-solving methods. Just as they'd transformed the landslide crisis into an opportunity for growth, perhaps this fire could become a catalyst for something new. "The bears aren't just fleeing," Emma explained to the assembled team. "They're relocating their entire social structure. We need to support that movement, help them establish temporary corridors that could become permanent extensions of their territory." The plan came together quickly. Using the bears' own evacuation routes as guides, they established protective fire breaks and wildlife corridors. Traditional firefighting techniques merged with indigenous knowledge as Thomas coordinated, with tribal fire management experts who understood the role of controlled burns in forest health. But the bears themselves proved to be the most effective strategists. The grandmother bears led their extended family groups along ancient pathways that humans had forgotten, finding water sources and safe havens that weren't on any modern map. "They're teaching us again," Thomas said, watching through binoculars as a mother bear showed her cubs how to find water in what looked like dry ground. The old ways living through new teachers. The fire's approach created an eerie twilight, but through the smoke and ash, something remarkable emerged. Bears from outside the sanctuary, drawn by the organized movement of their cousins, began joining the evacuation. The sanctuary bear's unique social behavior was spreading, showing others a new way to face crisis. Together, Emma worked tirelessly, coordinating between fire teams, wildlife experts, and sanctuary staff. Her mother's compass seemed to pulse. With each decision, while the bear medallion reminded her of the deeper wisdom at work. These bears had already transformed trauma into triumph once. They would find a way to do it again. A sudden wind shift brought the fire dangerously close to the old fire tower, now the sanctuary's heart. But before humans could react, the bears showed them another miracle. Using their cooperative techniques, they cleared a natural firebreak, working together to move fallen trees and create a defensive line. They're not just protecting themselves, Dr. Martinez observed in amazement. They're protecting the place that helped them heal. Through the night, human and bear worked in parallel, each using their own methods to save what mattered most. The bears' coordinated movements helped firefighters predict fire patterns, while their knowledge of hidden water sources proved invaluable in establishing containment lines. Dawn broke on a transformed landscape. The fire had carved new paths through the forest, but thanks to the combined efforts of humans and bears, the sanctuary's core remained intact. More importantly, the bears' social structure had not just survived, it had grown stronger. "Look," Thomas pointed as the smoke cleared. The bears were returning, but not just to their old territories. They were exploring the burned areas, already beginning to teach their cubs how to find food in the changed landscape. The grandmother bears led the way, showing their extended family how to dig for roots that fire had exposed, how to find honey in trees that lightning had opened. They weren't just surviving, they were turning devastation into opportunity, just as they'd done with every challenge before. Emma watched a young bear cub playing in an ash-dusted meadow, supervised by not just its mother, but by several adults from different family groups. The fire had forced them to adapt, but in doing so, it had expanded their remarkable community even further. The fire didn't destroy their bonds, she realized. It proved how unbreakable they've become. In the weeks that followed, new growth emerged from the burned earth, and with it, new understanding. The bears' response to the fire had demonstrated levels of cooperation and cultural preservation that challenged every preconception about wildlife behavior. More importantly, they'd shown once again that the greatest strength comes not from fighting alone, but from facing challenges as a community. Their unique society hadn't just survived, it had grown, teaching others that adaptation meant more than just enduring change. It meant transforming it into an opportunity for growth and connection. Emma touched her compass and medallion, feeling the wisdom of her mother, the tribe, and the bears flowing together. In the face of nature's most destructive force, these remarkable animals had demonstrated its most powerful truth, that love, expressed through cooperation and community, could transform any trial into triumph. The bear's song echoed through the renewed forest, carrying notes of victory, of family, of the endless capacity to begin again. They had taken the fire's destruction and made it part of their story, another chapter in their ongoing lesson about the power of choosing love over fear, unity over isolation, hope over despair. And in their triumph, they offered humanity another precious gift, the understanding that true resilience comes not from resisting change, but from learning to dance with it, to find in each challenge the seeds of new growth, new connections, and new ways of being family. Autumn painted the Sarah Two Rivers Wildlife Sanctuary in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, but the real transformation was happening on the ground. In the aftermath of the summer's fire, the bears had done something unprecedented. They were actively participating in the forest's renewal. Emma watched through her binoculars as the grandmother bears, Those original survivors from the train tracks incident led their extended family in what could only be described as deliberate forest management. They weren't just foraging, they were planting. "It's extraordinary," Dr. Martinez whispered, documenting the behavior. The bears were gathering berries from unburned areas and deliberately dropping them in burned zones where new growth would have the best chance. They cached seeds in specific patterns, created small depressions that would collect rainwater, and taught these techniques to their cubs. But most remarkable was how they'd expanded their cooperative society. Bears from neighboring territories, drawn by the success of the sanctuary's unique social structure, had begun adopting these behaviors. What had started with two desperate mothers on a train track had evolved into a revolutionary new way of being. Thomas approached, carrying sacred herbs and a letter. The International Conservation Council wants to designate the sanctuary as a living laboratory of interspecies cooperation, he announced. But there's more. Look who they're naming as lead researcher. Emma's heart swelled as she read the name, Sarah Two Rivers, posthumously recognized for her groundbreaking work. The bears had led them to her final research cache during the fire evacuation, revealing crucial data about ursine intelligence and social behavior. "She knew," Emma said softly, touching her mother's compass. "She saw their potential before any of us." A commotion drew their attention. Through the trees came Agent Rivera, but not in her usual professional attire. She wore hiking gear and carried sophisticated tracking equipment. "The bears' new social patterns are spreading," she reported excitedly. "We're seeing similar cooperative behaviors emerging in populations as far as Canada." The implications were staggering. The bears weren't just adapting, they were evolving, creating a new model of species behavior that could revolutionize wildlife. Conservation worldwide. "But that's not why I'm here," Rivera continued, her expression growing serious. "We've detected unusual movement patterns along the old summit timber routes. Someone's testing our defenses." Emma's hand went to her medallion, feeling the weight of both honor and responsibility. The bears had transformed trauma into triumph. But there would always be those who saw only opportunity in vulnerability. As if understanding the threat, one of the grandmother bears approached the group. She was massive now, her dark fur silvered with age, but her eyes held the same fierce intelligence that had caught Emma's attention that night on the tracks. Behind her, cubs from 3 different mothers played together, while younger adults worked cooperatively to prepare for winter. The bear stopped at the edge of the group and did something that still amazed even veteran sanctuary staff. She made deliberate eye contact with Emma, then looked toward the section of forest where suspicious activity had been detected. "She's warning us," Thomas said softly. "They remember, and they're choosing to help protect others from what they survived." The bears' remarkable journey had transformed not just their own species, but human understanding of what was possible. Their response to trauma hadn't been to become more aggressive or withdrawn. Instead, they'd created something entirely new, a society based on cooperation, protection, and shared wisdom. Emma gathered her team, including young interns from the tribal youth program. These teenagers had grown up watching the bears' transformation, learning from their example about resilience and community. "We're not just protecting bears anymore," she told them. "We're protecting a new way of being, a model that could change how we think about conservation, about healing, about family itself." The bears had shown that the answer to darkness wasn't more darkness, it was expanding the circle of light. Their cooperative den systems had evolved into something scientists were calling multi-species support networks, where different bear families shared resources, protected each other's cubs, and even adopted orphaned youngsters. As the group moved through the autumn forest, Emma noticed something remarkable. The bears weren't retreating from the human presence. They were paralleling them, moving in coordinated groups to help patrol their shared territory. "They're not just surviving anymore," Thomas observed. "They're showing us what true partnership looks like." Near Sarah's memorial, now surrounded by new growth from seeds the bears had planted, Emma found fresh evidence of their extraordinary cultural evolution. The bears had created what anthropologists were calling teaching zones, areas where older bears systematically demonstrated survival skills to younger generations. But it went beyond basic survival. The bears were teaching their cubs about trust, about cooperation, about turning trauma into strength. They showed them the old trafficking sites, now transformed into productive feeding grounds, as if to say, "This is how we change the story." A young bear cub, bold with the confidence of growing up in this new society, approached Emma's group. Its mother watched calmly, demonstrating the extraordinary trust that had developed between species. The cub stood on its hind legs, sniffing curiously at Emma's medallion. "They recognize the symbols of protection," Thomas said. "They've learned to distinguish friend from foe, to understand that strength comes in many forms." Emma touched her compass and medallion, feeling the convergence of different kinds of wisdom. Her mother's sacrifice, Sarah's vision, the bear's resilience, and the tribe's ancient knowledge. All had come together to create something unprecedented, a model of healing that transcended species boundaries. The sanctuary had become more than a protected space. It was an incubator of hope, showing that even the deepest wounds could become foundations for new growth. The bears had proven that the most powerful response to cruelty was not retaliation, but transformation. As the autumn day waned, Emma watched the bears prepare their winter dens, not as isolated family units, but as an interconnected community. They had taken the very things meant to destroy them, the trauma of trafficking, the threat of fire, the pressure of development, and used them as catalysts for evolution. "They're not just changing themselves," Dr. Martinez said, reviewing her latest data. "They're changing our understanding of what's possible. These bears are showing us that adaptation isn't just about survival, it's about choosing a better way forward." The bear's unique song echoed through the golden forest, carrying notes of triumph, of wisdom, of the endless capacity for love to reshape reality. They had taken the darkness of their past and transformed it into a light that now guided others toward a new way of being. Emma stood at the heart of it all, feeling the pulse of her mother's compass aligned with the rhythm of the bear's song. They had all been changed by this journey, human and bear alike, learning that the greatest power lies not in resisting change, but in transforming it into something beautiful and new. The future would bring new challenges, but the bears had shown them how to face them, together with courage, with wisdom, and with the understanding that family was not limited by blood or species, but expanded by love and the choice to protect what matters most. Winter descended on the Sarah Two Rivers Wildlife Sanctuary with unexpected violence. A polar vortex, driven by changing climate patterns, plunged temperatures to record lows. Emma stood at the observation post, her mother's compass and tribal medallion frosted with ice crystals, watching the bears face their greatest challenge yet. But these weren't the same bears who had once huddled in traffickers' cages. The sanctuary's population had evolved into something remarkable, a society that didn't just survive hardship, but transformed it into opportunity for growth. Through the swirling snow, Emma watched the grandmother bears orchestrate something unprecedented. They were creating what scientists would later call thermal communities, gathering multiple family groups into carefully selected den sites where shared body heat and collective knowledge ensured survival. They're rewriting everything we thought we knew about bear behavior, Dr. Martinez marveled, recording data as the bears worked together to insulate their shared dens with branches and vegetation. This isn't just adaptation, it's innovation. Even more extraordinary was how they cared for the vulnerable. Cubs from different mothers were gathered into the warmest central dens, protected and nourished by any lactating female. The strong hunted for the weak, sharing food in ways that defied traditional competition-based models of wildlife behavior. But the bears' greatest test came when the storm isolated a group of young conservationists at the old fire tower. As temperatures plummeted and rescue teams struggled to reach them, something extraordinary happened. The grandmother bears, those first survivors who had learned to trust humans during their own rescue, led their extended family in an unprecedented response. They began clearing paths through the snow, using their massive bodies to break trail, showing the stranded humans the way to safety. "They remember," Thomas said softly, watching through binoculars as the bears guided the conservationists to heated emergency shelters. "They're returning the protection they once received." This wasn't just instinct or coincidence. The bears had developed a sophisticated understanding of human activities in their territory. They recognized uniforms, understood patrol patterns, and had learned to distinguish between those who protected and those who threatened. Agent Rivera arrived with emergency supplies, her face etched with concern. The storms disrupted trafficking routes across the region. We're seeing desperate attempts to establish new ones, including through the sanctuary. But the traffickers hadn't counted on the bears' evolved social structure. The sanctuary's population had developed complex warning systems using their unique vocalizations to alert each other to threats. Their cooperative society had become its own security network. Emma watched as the bears organized themselves into protective units, experienced adults shepherding younger ones to safety, while sentinel bears monitored suspicious activity. They weren't just reacting to threat, they were actively working to prevent what they had once suffered. "Look at this," Dr. Martinez called, pointing to thermal imaging displays. The bears had created a sophisticated rotation system, ensuring that no family group bore too much of the burden of cold or hunger. They shared food caches, took turns breaking trail through deep snow, and collectively cared for each other's cubs. The grandmother bears, their fur now white with age and wisdom, led by example. They taught younger generations not just how to survive, but how to thrive through cooperation. Each challenge, whether storm, threat, or scarcity, was met with collective innovation. Near Sarah's memorial, now preserved in a hollow of warmth created by the bears' careful arrangement of windbreaks, Emma found evidence of their growing cultural sophistication. They had begun creating what anthropologists called story sites, places where they deliberately demonstrated to their cubs the journey from trauma to triumph. "They're not just passing on survival skills," Thomas observed. "They're teaching resilience, cooperation, the power of choosing a different way." The polar vortex had transformed the sanctuary into a frozen wilderness, but within it, the bears had created pockets of warmth and life. Their shared dens became centers of learning, where cubs from different mothers grew up understanding that family meant more than blood. Emma touched her compass and medallion, feeling the convergence of different kinds of wisdom. Her mother had taught her about sacrifice, Sarah about vision, the tribe about harmony with nature. But the bears had shown them all something new, that the greatest power lay not in individual strength, but in the choice to be stronger together. As the storm raged on, the bears' response revealed new depths of their transformation. They didn't just survive the cold, they mastered it, turning harsh conditions into opportunities for deeper cooperation. Their unique vocalizations evolved to carry through the howling wind, developing what scientists called storm dialects to maintain their vital communication networks. They're not just adapting to change, Dr. Martinez noted, reviewing her data. They're actively shaping their environment, creating new social structures that make survival more certain for everyone. The sanctuary had become more than a protected space. It was an incubator of evolution, showing how trauma could become a catalyst for transformation. The bears had proven that the most powerful response to adversity was not to fight alone, but to create communities of mutual support. Emma watched a young bear cub, born to one of the rescued mothers, confidently navigate the storm-altered landscape. It moved with the assurance of one who had never known isolation, who understood in its bones that strength came from connection. The bear's song echoed through the frozen forest, carrying notes of triumph, of wisdom, of the endless capacity for love to reshape reality. They had taken the darkness of their past, the cages, the chains, the separation, and transformed it into a light that now guided others toward a new way of being. As the winter deepened, their story spread far beyond the sanctuary's boundaries. Wildlife managers worldwide began studying their model of cooperative survival. Conservation projects started incorporating their lessons about the power of protecting not just individual animals, but the social bonds that helped them thrive. The bears had shown that true evolution wasn't just about adapting to change. It was about choosing how to change, about turning adversity into opportunity for growth. Their response to trauma hadn't been to become more aggressive or withdrawn, but to create something entirely new, a society based on mutual support, shared wisdom, and the understanding that family was not limited by blood, but expanded by love. Emma stood at the heart of it all, feeling the pulse of her mother's compass aligned with the rhythm of the bear's song. They had all been transformed by this journey, human and bear alike, learning that the greatest power lay not in fighting against what hurt us, but in choosing to create something beautiful from the raw materials of loss and hope. The winter wind carried the bear's song through the forest, a melody of triumph and possibility. They had taken everything meant to break them and used it to build something stronger than anyone had imagined possible. In doing so, they had taught humanity a precious lesson, that sometimes the deepest wounds become the foundations for the most powerful healing. And in that healing lay the truth that would guide generations to come, that family was not about species or blood or tradition, but about the courage to love beyond boundaries, to protect beyond limits, and to choose again and again the path of transformation over the path of fear. 2 years had passed since that fateful night on the train tracks when Emma had first encountered a mother bear's desperate love. Now she stood at the sanctuary's highest point, watching a sunrise that marked not just a new day, but a new era in the understanding of wildlife, healing, and the true meaning of family. The Two Rivers Wildlife Sanctuary had become more than a protected space. It was a living testament to the power of transformation. The bear's revolutionary social structure had sparked a global shift in conservation philosophy. What had started with two mother bears choosing cooperation over competition had grown into a movement that was changing how humans understood their relationship with the natural world. Emma touched her mother's compass and tribal medallion, feeling the weight of all that had led to this moment. Below her, the morning mist revealed an extraordinary scene. The grandmother bears, those original survivors who had first shown that love could overcome trauma, were leading a ceremony of their own making. Scientists had documented this remarkable behavior, but struggled to classify it. The bears gathered in a circle around Sarah's memorial, now surrounded by flourishing plants they had deliberately cultivated. Cubs from multiple families played in the center, while adults took turns standing watch, demonstrating their unique model of shared protection. They're teaching us again, Thomas said, joining Emma at the overlook. Not just about survival, but about celebration, about remembering, about choosing joy even after suffering. The bear's unique song rose through the morning air, but it had evolved into something even more complex. Different family groups added their own harmonies, creating what musicologists called layered narrative vocalizations, a way of sharing their collective story through sound. Dr. Martinez approached with her latest research findings. The behavioral changes are spreading faster than we ever imagined. We're seeing cooperative den systems emerging in bear populations across 3 continents. They're not just surviving, they're teaching others their model of community-based resilience. But it was the newest generation of cubs that truly showed how far they'd come. Born to mothers who had never known captivity, they moved through the world with a confidence that came from knowing they were part of something larger than themselves. They understood instinctively what their grandmothers had learned through hardship, that true strength came from connection, not isolation. Agent Rivera's arrival brought news that confirmed the bear's impact extended far beyond the sanctuary. Wildlife trafficking networks are collapsing, she reported. Not just because of enforcement, but because the animals themselves are developing cooperative defense strategies. They're using the sanctuary bears model to protect each other. Emma watched as one of the grandmother bears demonstrated a complex foraging technique to cubs from 3 different mothers. The old bear's fur was silver now, but her eyes held the same fierce intelligence that had connected with Emma that night on the tracks. She had taken her trauma and transformed it into wisdom, her pain into protection for future generations. "Look there," Thomas pointed to where the sanctuary's borders had once been. The bears had gradually expanded their territory, not through aggression, but through invitation. Other wildlife had begun adopting their cooperative behaviors, wolves denning near bear families, elk herds integrating into their warning systems. "They're creating something entirely new," Dr. Martinez marveled. "A multi-species support network that defies everything we thought we knew about territorial behavior." The morning light strengthened, illuminating the full scope of the bear's transformation. What had begun as a desperate fight for survival had evolved into a revolutionary model of community, healing, and growth. They had taken every challenge, trafficking, fire, storm, and threat, and transformed it into an opportunity to demonstrate the power of choosing love over fear. Near the old fire tower, now a global education center, Emma saw the newest addition to the sanctuary's program. Young conservation leaders from around the world gathered to learn not just about wildlife protection, but about the deeper lessons the bears had taught. How trauma could become a catalyst for positive change. How healing happened best in community. How family could transcend every boundary. The grandmother bears had begun approaching these groups, deliberately demonstrating their journey from victims to teachers. They showed their scars not as wounds, but as medals of survival, teaching points for a new way of being. "They're not just surviving anymore," Thomas observed. "They're showing us all how to thrive." Emma's mother's compass seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the bear's song, while her tribal medallion reflected the morning light like a beacon. She thought of all the threads that had woven together to create this moment. Her mother's sacrifice, Sarah's vision, the bear's resilience, the tribe's wisdom. The sanctuary had become a living laboratory of hope, proving that even the deepest wounds could become foundations for new growth. The bears had shown that the most powerful response to cruelty was not revenge, but transformation. The conscious choice to create something beautiful from the raw materials of pain. As the sun climbed higher, Emma watched the bears begin their daily routines. But there was nothing routine about what they had achieved. Each shared meal, each protected cub, each cooperative hunt was a testament to their extraordinary choice to rewrite the rules of what was possible. "We thought we were saving them," Dr. Martinez said softly, "but they were teaching us all along." The bear's song echoed through the morning air, carrying notes of triumph, wisdom, and the endless capacity for love to reshape reality. They had taken everything meant to break them, the cages, the chains, the separation, and transformed it into a light that now guided others toward a new way of being. Emma stood at the heart of it all, feeling the convergence of past and future, of loss and hope, of ending and beginning. The bears had shown that true evolution wasn't just about adapting to change. It was about choosing how to change, about turning adversity into opportunity for growth. Their story had begun in darkness on those train tracks, but it had blossomed into something luminous and profound. They had proven that family wasn't limited by blood or species or tradition, but expanded by love and the choice to protect what mattered most. As the morning unfolded, Emma watched the next generation of cubs learn from their extraordinary community. They were growing up knowing that strength came from connection, that healing happened in community, that love was the most powerful force for transformation. The bear's song carried through the forest, a melody of triumph and possibility. They had taken everything meant to break them and built something stronger than anyone had imagined possible. In doing so, they had taught humanity a precious lesson: that sometimes the deepest wounds become the foundations for the most powerful healing. And in that healing lay the truth that would guide generations to come, that family was not about species or blood or tradition, but about the courage to love beyond boundaries, to protect beyond limits, and to choose, again and again, the path of transformation over the path of fear. The sanctuary would continue to evolve, to teach, to heal. But its greatest lesson would always be the one those first mother bears had demonstrated on a desperate night, when love proved stronger than chains. That true power lay not in the ability to destroy, but in the choice to create something beautiful from the broken pieces of the past. Emma touched her compass and medallion one last time, feeling the completion of a circle that had begun with her own mother's sacrifice. The bears had shown them all that the end of one story was just the beginning of another, that every wound could become a doorway to something greater than survival. Their song echoed through the morning, no longer a call of desperation, but a hymn of triumph, an invitation to all who heard it to choose love over fear, connection over isolation, and the endless possibility of transformation over the finite limitations of the past. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.